This is the crash that changed everything. A 50G impact. At over 200 miles per hour. And the worst part? Formula One knew it was coming. Drivers warned the FIA for weeks. They predicted the exact scenario. Massive speed differences. Cars suddenly slowing down. No time to react. And then, it happened. Oliver Bearman? Straight into the wall. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a mistake. This was a failure. Of the rules. Of the system. Of the people who were supposed to stop it. And now, the drivers are done staying quiet. Because behind closed doors, they're uniting. Pushing back. Demanding immediate changes. Not next month. Not after more meetings. Now. Because if nothing changes before the next race, this could happen again. And next time, we might not be talking about a driver walking away. Subscribe now? Because what really caused this crash, and why drivers are now turning against the FIA, is something Formula One can no longer hide. At first, it didn't look like a failure. Because from the outside, the race continued. Cars circulating. Strategies playing out. Positions changing. And for a moment, it almost felt like just another incident. But inside the paddock, no one saw it that way. Because every single driver recognized what had just happened. Not the crash itself. The cause behind it. Because this wasn't unexpected. This wasn't a rare situation. This was something they had all experienced. Multiple times. In every race leading up to Suzuka. That moment, when the car ahead suddenly slows down. Not because of braking. Not because of a mistake. Because of the system. Because of energy recovery. Because of a rule. And in that moment, everything becomes unpredictable. Because the driver behind is still at full speed. Still pushing. Still committed. And suddenly, the closing speed explodes. 40, 50, even 80 kilometers per hour difference. In seconds. And that's not something you can manage. That's not something you can react to. That's something you survive. If you're lucky. And that's exactly what drivers had been trying to explain. For weeks. But here's the detail that changes everything. They weren't just warning about danger. They were describing the exact accident. Before it happened. Carlos Sainz said it clearly. This will end in a crash. Esteban Ocon described the feeling. Looking in the mirror? And seeing a car arriving way too fast. Verstappen said there would be no time to react. And Bearman himself, less than a day before the race, talked about those exact situations in the race. Those exact risks. And then, he became the example. That's what makes this different. Because this isn't hindsight. This is prediction becoming reality. And once that happens, you can't ignore it anymore. Because now, the responsibility is clear. This wasn't a hidden flaw. This wasn't an unknown variable. This was identified. Explained. Repeated. And still, nothing changed. Until impact. Until 50G. Until a driver limping away from the car. And that image is what triggered everything that followed. Because in that moment, the conversation inside Formula One changed completely. From discussion to accountability. Because now the question is no longer, is there a problem? It's, why wasn't it fixed? And that's what's driving the revolt. Not just the danger. The delay. Because drivers don't just feel the risk. They feel that they were ignored. And that's where frustration turns into something stronger. Pressure. Because once drivers believe that their warnings don't lead to action, they stop waiting. They start pushing. And that's exactly what's happening now. Because this crash didn't just expose a flaw. It exposed a gap between what drivers experience and how quickly the system reacts. And that gap is what they're now trying to close. Immediately. Because they know something the FIA cannot afford to ignore anymore. This will happen again. Unless something changes. And that's why everything now builds toward the next step. Not what happened in Suzuka. What happens after it. Because the real story is not the crash. It's the response. And whether Formula One moves fast enough before this becomes something even worse. And this is where everything explodes. Because once the crash is understood, once the cause is clear, once the warnings are proven right, there is only one thing left. Action. But that's exactly where the conflict begins. Because inside Formula One, not everyone wants the same solution. Drivers want immediate change. Remove the unpredictability. Reduce the speed differences. Fix the problem now. But teams see something else. Because this system, this exact behavior, is where performance comes from. Some teams mastered it. They built their advantage on energy management, on exploiting those moments of deployment and loss. And now, that advantage is under threat. which means every change is not just a safety decision. It's a competitive one. And that's where tension explodes. Because if the FIA moves too fast, some teams lose everything they built. If they move too slow, drivers lose trust completely. And that's the balance that's breaking right now. Because after Suzuka, drivers are no longer negotiating. They are demanding. Verstappen said it directly. What are we waiting for? And that question has no comfortable answer. Because the FIA already responded. Meetings, evaluations, possible changes in April. But for the drivers, that response feels disconnected. Too slow, too cautious, too late. Because they're not thinking about meetings. They're thinking about the next lap, the next straight, the next moment where a car in front might suddenly lose speed again. And this time, there might not be space. There might not be runoff. There might not be luck. And that's what's driving this revolt forward. Because now, this isn't theoretical. It's personal. Every driver can picture it. Every driver can feel it. Because they've all been in that situation. Just without the crash. Until now. And that's why Miami changes everything. Because Miami is not Suzuka. Longer straights. Tighter walls. Less margin for error. Exactly the kind of track where this problem becomes even more dangerous. And the drivers know it. George Russell said it clearly. If nothing changes, Miami could be worse. And that's the urgency. Because now the timeline is no longer flexible. It's immediate. Fix it before Miami. Or risk another incident. And maybe something far more serious. But here's where it becomes even more critical. Because the FIA is not just dealing with a safety issue. They're dealing with credibility. Because once drivers feel ignored, once warnings turn into accidents, trust disappears. And without trust, the entire system weakens. Drivers stop believing in decisions. Teams start questioning direction. Fans start seeing something is wrong. And suddenly, this is no longer just about one crash. It's about the stability of the sport itself. Because Formula One has always evolved after impact. But the key difference is timing. Do you act before the next one? Or after it? And right now, that decision is being made. Behind closed doors. Under pressure. With every driver watching. Because this is the moment that defines everything. Not the crash. The response to it. Because if the FIA acts fast, if they introduce real changes, if they remove the unpredictability, then this becomes a turning point. A moment where the sport corrected itself in time. But if they don't, if the same system remains, if drivers keep facing the same risk, then this revolt won't slow down. It will grow. Stronger. More united. More difficult to control. Because drivers have already crossed the line. From warning to demanding. And once that line is crossed, there is no going back. So now everything leads to one final question. Not what caused the crash. Not who is responsible. What happens next? Because that answer will decide whether Formula One learned from this moment, or whether this was just the beginning of something much worse. And this is where everything reaches the point of no return. Because after the crash, after the reactions, after the pressure, there is one reality Formula One cannot escape anymore. This system created the accident. Not indirectly. Not partially. Directly. And once that becomes undeniable, the entire conversation changes. Because now, this is no longer about improving the sport. It's about fixing a mistake. And mistakes at this level come with consequences. Because if the FIA admits it openly, they expose the foundation of the regulations. If they don't, they risk another incident. And that's the trap. Because either way, something breaks. But here's where it becomes even more intense. Because the drivers already made their decision. They're done waiting. Done repeating the same warnings. Done trusting that time will fix it. Now, they want action. Immediate. Concrete. Visible. And that's what transforms this from pressure into a revolt. Because a revolt in Formula One is not about shouting. It's about unity. And right now, that unity is real. Drivers from different teams, different interests, different positions, all aligned on one thing. This cannot continue. And that's something the FIA cannot control. Because you can manage one driver. You can respond to one complaint. But you cannot ignore all of them. Not when they're saying the same thing. Not after what just happened. And that's why this moment is so dangerous. Because control is starting to shift. From the governing body to the grid itself. And once that shift begins, it changes everything. Because now the next step doesn't belong entirely to the FIA. It belongs to the drivers too. And if they feel ignored again, they won't just speak. They will act. And that's the scenario Formula One fears the most. Because a united grid has power the sport cannot easily contain. But here's the final layer. The one everything has been building toward. This is no longer just about safety. It's about identity. Because the problem at the center of this crash is not just the speed. It's unpredictability. Cars behaving in ways drivers cannot anticipate. Systems overriding instinct. Moments where control disappears. And that goes against everything Formula One has always been. Because this sport is built on precision, on trust, on knowing exactly what will happen when you push the limit. And right now, that certainty is gone. Replaced by something else. Something artificial. Something unstable. And that's what drivers are really fighting against. Not just the risk, the loss of control, the loss of what makes this sport feel real. So now, everything comes down to one final outcome. Not the next meeting. Not the next statement. The next race. Because when the lights go out, there will be no more excuses. No more delays. No more discussions. Only reality. Because if the cars behave the same way, if the unpredictability is still there, if drivers still feel that risk, then this doesn't stop. It escalates. Fast. Because at that point, the drivers won't just demand change. They will force it. In ways Formula One is not used to handling. But if the FIA gets it right, if they act in time, if they remove the core issue, then everything shifts. The pressure drops. The trust starts to rebuild. And this moment becomes something else. A turning point. The moment the sport corrected itself, before it was too late. But right now, standing between those two outcomes, there's only one question left. Not what happened. Not why it happened. But whether Formula One is willing to change. Before the next crash answers it again.